Welcome to SoulSutra, where timeless stories meet modern wisdom. Today, we're diving into a classic tale, The Emperor's New Clothes, and discovering what it can teach us about business, leadership, and decision-making. Trust me, there's more to this tale than meets the eye. First, let's revisit the story. The Emperor's New Clothes is a tale by Hans Christian Andersen that's as old as time, yet incredibly relevant today. Once upon a time, there was an emperor, but this wasn't just any emperor. This was a man obsessed with appearances, with how the world saw him, consumed by the idea of looking the part. He loved nothing more than flaunting his wardrobe, showcasing the finest silks and jewels. Think of him as the CEO of his kingdom, and his priority, his company image, at least in his mind. One day, two cunning weavers, perhaps consultants in today's world, arrived at his court. These weavers, they were masters of spin, of crafting stories, and they promised the emperor the most exquisite clothes ever seen. Clothes so fine, so delicate, that they were invisible to anyone who was unfit for their job or hopelessly stupid. The emperor, intrigued and flattered, completely taken by this idea, commissioned the weavers. They set up their looms, but here's the catch. They were weaving nothing but air, a grand illusion. The emperor's ministers, his trusted advisors, driven by the fear of appearing incompetent, started playing along. They pretended to see these magnificent clothes, showering the weavers with praise. Think about those board meetings where everyone nods in agreement, afraid to voice a different opinion. This is where the danger begins. The emperor himself, caught in this web of deception, blinded by his own ego, couldn't bear the thought of being seen as unworthy, or worse yet, stupid. So he too played along, praising the invisible garments. Finally, the day arrived for the grand reveal. The emperor, in all his imagined finery, paraded through the town, his invisible clothes the talk of the kingdom. And the crowd, well, they played their part too. No one, not a single person, dared to point out the obvious, terrified of being labeled unfit or stupid. It was a collective delusion, a shared fear of standing out, of being the lone voice of dissent. In MBA terms, this story is a textbook example of groupthink. Remember those nodding heads, the silent agreement? That's groupthink in action. It occurs when individuals, no matter how intelligent or experienced, suppress their dissenting opinions, their doubts, their concerns to conform to the majority. They choose harmony over critical thinking, even if it means sacrificing the best outcome. In the emperor's court, everyone, from the ministers to the townspeople, pretended to see the invisible clothes. Why? Because they were afraid to be seen as different, to stand out from the crowd. They chose conformity over honesty. In business, this can be fatal. Groupthink can lead to disastrous decisions because it stifles creativity, innovation, and most importantly, truth. It creates an environment where the status quo reigns supreme, where challenging the boss, even when they're about to walk down the metaphorical street naked, is unthinkable. So how do we combat this groupthink virus? Leaders, this is where you come in. Let's talk about the emperor's Achilles heel, his vanity. The weavers knew exactly which buttons to push, didn't they? They appealed to his ego, his desire to be seen as special, unique. This is the peril of flattery, particularly for those in positions of power. It's intoxicating, addictive, and can blind you to reality. In the business world, this translates to the agency problem. Think of those employees more concerned with pleasing the boss, telling them what they want to hear, than delivering honest feedback, even if it means saving the company from disaster. They're more worried about keeping their jobs than doing what's right for the organization. This isn't just about avoiding uncomfortable conversations, it's about a culture where honesty takes a backseat to self-preservation. Leaders, here's your challenge. Actively seek out genuine feedback. Create an environment where your team feels safe to challenge you, to disagree with you, to tell you you're wrong, even if it stings a little. Remember, that sting, that moment of discomfort, is a small price to pay for the long-term health of your company. Now let's talk about what allowed those cunning weavers to pull off their grand illusion: a lack of transparency and accountability. They operated in the shadows, their looms empty, their promises hollow. No one questioned their methods, their progress, or even the absence of actual clothes. In business, this is where things can unravel quickly. Lack of transparency breeds distrust, suspicion, and ultimately, dysfunction. It creates an environment ripe for manipulation, for unethical behavior to flourish. Think about Enron WorldCom. Those scandals weren't just about greed, they were about a systemic failure of transparency and accountability. So, how do we weave a different story in our organizations? It starts with clear communication, open book policies, and a culture where questions are encouraged, not stifled. Check one, check. Let's talk about the hero of our story, the one who dared to speak truth to power, the child. In a world of silence, of collective delusion, the child's voice cut through the noise, shattering the illusion with a simple truth. This, my friends, is the power of psychological safety. Imagine a workplace where every employee, regardless of their position, feels safe to speak up, to voice their concerns, to challenge the status quo. That's psychological safety in action. It's about creating an environment where honesty is valued even when it's uncomfortable, where dissent is seen as a strength, not a threat. Leaders, this is your call to action. Foster an open-door policy, not just in words but in action. Encourage your team to share their ideas, their concerns, their perspectives. Finally, let's address the emperor's fatal flaw, his overconfidence. He was so convinced of his own brilliance, so blinded by the flattery of those around him, that he failed to see the obvious. He was being played. This, my friends, is the danger of overconfidence bias. It's a trap that any leader can fall into. This belief in our own infallibility, this tendency to overestimate our abilities and underestimate the risks. We've all been there. That moment when we're so sure of our own judgment that we ignore the warning signs, the red flags, the dissenting voices. So how do we avoid the emperor's fate? It starts with humility, with acknowledging that we don't have all the answers, that we need diverse perspectives, that we're not immune to making mistakes. Embrace data-driven decision-making. Don't let your gut feeling, your intuition, be the sole driver of your choices. So, what can we learn from the emperor's new clothes? Avoid groupthink, encourage diverse opinions. Keep your ego in check, seek genuine feedback. Ensure transparency and accountability in all processes. Create psychological safety, let your team speak freely. Watch out for overconfidence. Stay grounded in reality. Lead ethically. Integrity always wins in the long run. This timeless tale isn't just a children's story, it's a masterclass in leadership, ethics, and decision-making. Remember, wisdom is everywhere, even in children's stories.